Hello, my name's Adrian Goldberg and welcome to Byline Radio, or if you're listening on catch up, to the Byline Times podcast. The Byline Times, it's what the papers don't say, what radio doesn't report and what telly doesn't tell you. This time, what is potentially anyway, the deadliest point of conflict in the Russia-Ukraine war, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant in Enerhodar in southeastern Ukraine. Both countries have accused the other of shelling the nuclear plant, which is the largest in Europe. Ukraine's President Zelensky has warned that Russian troops who use Zaporizhzhia as cover to attack Ukrainian towns and cities will themselves be targeted. The G7 group of countries has called on Russia to withdraw to avoid creating a nuclear catastrophe. We'll be catching up very shortly with our reporter Zarina Zabriskie, who was in the area nearby. Before that, a quick reminder that Byline Radio and the Byline Times podcast are funded by subscriptions to the Byline Times, our brilliant monthly newspaper, edited by Hardeep Matharu. We can report without fear or favour and hold the rich and the powerful to account because our funding comes from ordinary subscribers, people like you. So do please subscribe to the Byline Times if you can. You get more details at bylinetimes.com. That's at bylinetimes.com. And if you have already subscribed, thank you. Let's welcome now Zarina Zabriskie, who's been reporting on the Ukraine invasion by Russia for many weeks now for Byline Times and for the Euromaidan press. Zarina, hello. You're very close now to this nuclear plant, as close as you can safely be, given that it is occupied by the Russians. Just tell us something about the area that you are in, please.
Yes. Hi, Adrian. I'm about like an hour and a half away. Usually people used to get there by bus. There is a satellite town that the Soviets used to build next to the nuclear power stations. The same goes for Chernobyl, for instance. So people lived quite comfortably to attend their job at the nuclear power plants. And right now, the whole area around is occupied by the Russians and has been so from March, first week of March, when on the 3rd of March, there was this big and infamous instance when the Russians first shelled the biggest nuclear power plant in Europe. And at that time, both the U.S. President Biden and at the time Johnson and Macron, everybody and their mother called on Zelensky in the middle of the night because it was very alarming. And I was watching it live as the Chechens entered the territory. There was a big commotion and the people in charge of the nuclear plant were going live on Telegram channels and on social media asking for help. So at the time, fortunately, there wasn't a lot of damage being done to the station. But for a few weeks after that, in March, there has been some kind of like detonation of explosives and all sort of things that the nuclear plants are not usually designed for. And I'm currently working on a big article. I actually was lucky enough to get to know closely and to interview a former Soviet engineer, now an American citizen, who was at the very beginning of the construction of the plant. So he told me a lot of inside details, which I won't share now. But the bottom line is that the power plant itself is built very solidly and, funny enough, somewhat designed for the military hostilities, for in other words, for the war, and even some sort of nuclear activities, because that's what the engineer told me. However, it is extremely dangerous because the part that was not designed for any kind of hostilities is the storage of the nuclear waste, which is like the similar unit in Chernobyl is located under a big sarcophagus, and that part was designed later. And just like in Chernobyl, which is not an active nuclear power station, as you know, this part needs constant attendance and it needs cooling. It needs the water in the cooling pool to be constantly maintained at a certain temperature, because if the water heats up, the nuclear waste basically blows up, without going into much details. And in order to cool this water, Adrian, the station needs to be constantly connected to power supply. Funny enough, it's a electricity power station, and it needs the power. And so even though there are 6 reactors at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, only one of them is currently working. And if the station goes in a blackout state, there is a danger of this cooling pool heating up, and either the core reactor, the core of this nuclear waste exploding, or some leakage to be there. There are also other type of dangers, and they're listed by the International Atomic Energy Agency in what they call 7 pillars of safety. If somebody wants details, they can Google it up. It's all there, and it includes fire safety and ventilation, communication, and all of these pillars are constantly now under danger and being violated by the Russian Federation troops who've been occupied the station since March. So what happened, and why do we have all this conversation now, is because on the 5th and 7th of August, there was shelling. There were many instances of shelling and explosions reported. And the Russian side is accusing Ukraine of doing that. And we know that they have been doing it consistently, and whatever happens, they accuse Ukraine. And Ukraine, fair enough, says that it's the Russian troops that are staging a provocation. And there's been a report by the Ukrainian intelligence that the Russians brought a self-propelled gun, which from time to time shells at the areas that the Russian employees, or in the, actually not employees, but the Russian authorities that are now occupying the station are aware of, and they are basically not afraid of the shelling. So the situation at the station is peculiar because there are, like I mentioned before several times, there are troops and militaries who are in charge of everything, but it's being operated by the Ukrainian agency and Ukrainian employees of this agency, Energoatom. There's basically Ukrainian territory, Ukrainian power station, Ukrainian employees, the Russian military who step in between the safety and security guidelines and the Ukrainian employees. Plus, there's constant shelling.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very strategically important area, isn't it? You've got the Dnipro River nearby, and my understanding is that Russian troops are using the nuclear plant as cover to fire into other parts of Ukraine across the Dnipro River. Ukrainian forces have destroyed all of the bridges, which effectively is preventing Russia from rearming around that area as well. So it's an area of pretty intense conflict.
Actually, it's true that the Russians are constantly fighting at Nikopol and other small villages around here. I'm very close to this town, but you can't go there. You have to get a special permit as a journalist. But I'm not interested in showing yet more destruction, because I've shown them, I recorded and shared that before. What I'm interested in is actually, Adrian, getting to the bottom of what is happening at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station. And I get very lucky today, and that's the reason why I was late, because in the morning I was attending a special training and a special demonstration of the training and of the measures that the Ukrainian Rescues and Emergency Service would take if there is, in fact, an accident, and if there is a heightened radioactivity, and people need to be rescued, and people need to be properly processed. So I will be later sharing some videos and pictures, if anybody is interested, of the unique machinery and equipment and the way the staff is trained to deal with such contamination. And attending this training was the Minister of Energy of Ukraine, Galushenko, and the Minister of Internal Affairs, Denis Monastyrsky, and I want to say my old friend, the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Yevgen Yenin, because I already interviewed him before on other sites, and he actually knows me and gave me little interviews, so I will be sharing that. And they attended the training, made sure that the staff actually knows what's going on, and it was very impressive, as you will see from the videos. And then there was a little briefing, and I think there was BBC and me were the only foreigners there, and most of it was in Ukrainian, and I am learning Ukrainian, and I understand about 80%, but I will still have to decipher the rest of the of what they said to give you the exact summary of the briefing. But the bottom line is that there is danger, and there will be danger until the Russian troops are out of the territory and of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and until the whole area around it within the 50 kilometers diameter is cleared of any hostilities.
Mordecai, who's listening, sent a question, Zarina, and he said, is there really any possibility that Ukraine or Russia would hit the nuclear plant? He says there have only been 4 major nuclear disasters, Fukushima, Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island and SL1, and all have been accidents, not during fighting in a war. Now, Tom Zimbardo, who on Twitter is at Tom Mostly Zen, has also then written a thread about this in response to Mordecai, and he assesses the risk, the realistic risk of the plant being in some way ignited by fighting. And he doesn't say it's impossible, but he very much downplays the risk of it sort of being accidentally blown up. And you've talked about the resilience that's built into these plants. You know, they're pretty sturdy structures.
I also spoke to a lot of Western experts and the experts who build the plants. And the answer has 2 parts. The first part is, yes, it's pretty resilient and looks like it is actually okay if you look at the station itself. The second part of the answer is not as optimistic, and it's a little bit more disturbing because of the above mentioned nuclear waste and the coolant system. And add to it, and you can look up my article while I'm writing this new one on Zaporizhzhia. I already wrote for the Byline Times in the beginning of the war. There's an exclusive interview with the Chernobyl power plant engineer where everybody was saying, oh, well, the power plant is not working now, stop panicking. Well, this is not true, because both stations have this nuclear waste, and the nuclear waste is where the major danger is. And both Russians and Ukrainians are very, very well aware of that. And while Ukrainians, from everything I've seen and everything I've read and heard and spoke to people, have no intention to blow up their own station, which is their resource. It's on their land, and it, after all, supplies 20% of the energy to the country. On the other hand, the Russians have a lot of interest of, if not blowing up, then blackmailing the world community and using it as a leverage to communicate their needs, or to basically, like the Russian representative to the United States said, scare people with monstrous provocation that could happen if they pull the troops off the territory. So they basically using it, they kidnap people, they kidnap the employees of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and they just basically kidnap the whole station, and they hold it hostage, and they're using it as yet another tool of blackmail.
I want to talk about another aspect of the war as well, which is Ukraine's seemingly increased ability now to penetrate deeper into Russian-held territory. So in recent days, there's been an apparent attack on a Russian military base in Crimea, which of course is Ukrainian land that has been occupied now by Russia since 2014. And Russia claiming that this was sabotage of some sort, some kind of internal sabotage, but all the evidence suggests that Ukraine now is able to fire missiles much deeper into Russian-held territory. Is that how it's been seen in Ukraine? And is that giving Ukrainians confidence that they can turn the tide of the war?
Well, I didn't have a chance to check the news and the channels I rely upon on my information and for my daily reports on Euromaidan Press, because not all the channels you can rely on, because I was at this training and at the briefing. But the last time I checked was in the morning, and there were no official confirmation from the Ukrainian government that this were Ukrainian troops, in fact, hitting the Russian ammunition depots an airfield in Crimea, and there were several explosions, including yesterday in Crimea. There basically were jokes like "don't smoke next to the explosives" and stuff like this. It's mainly the international experts like British intelligence and the Institute of Study of War and other experts who come to the conclusion that these are the elite Ukrainian detachment that is working in the Crimea on exploding these resources and breaking down the supplies lines of the Russians. Since there were no official confirmation, I'm reluctant to comment on that. Like my personal opinion is I agree with the experts that it does look that it's a job done there locally. I mean, we don't have any evidence that the Ukrainian troops are using the newly delivered weapons, say HIMARS or any other long-range weapons. Until we have this official confirmation, it's better not to try and make some theories or conspiracy theories. But certainly there's more confidence, to answer your question, about the ability of Ukraine to counterattack, at least locally here, because we simply see the Russian troops and the Russian citizens who occupied Ukrainian territory in 2014. And believe me, I know it's Ukraine. I was growing up partly in Odessa in summers and partly in Crimea. And as I was a teenager, I was in Crimea a lot. And it's Ukraine. I mean, if you were there, you know very well it's Ukraine. Like, people speak Ukrainian. It's a part of Ukraine. So all these years, for 8 years, this area was occupied by the Russian troops who invaded it. So now seeing these people fleeing, everybody feels elated. I feel elated. I see these videos where Russians say, "Oh my God, we have explosions. We have to go back to Russia now." I mean, you just, you feel good. It feels good. I hope there personally, now let me emote, I hope there are more and more explosions to come, and that they, to go back to, from my emotions, because who cares, on the official part, Zelensky 2 days ago founded a committee on the Crimea and on getting this territory back. And I believe he was supported by the Canadian government. And now we're seeing a lot of movement, concerning Crimea. There's certainly a notion in the air that the Crimea will be a part of Ukrainian victory. Let me put it this way.
Well, that would be a significant blow for Russia if it were to be not only beaten back from Ukraine, but then also to lose the territory that it occupied in 2014. To go back to the nuclear reactor, where you're relatively close anyway, Zarina, the International Atomic Agency are keen to visit. President Zelensky has been critical of the United Nations. He said that they have not been doing enough to facilitate the visit. But if the IAEA is allowed eventually, and Russia has certainly been putting some restrictions in the way of that, what difference would that make?
It's a very good question, Adrian, and the answer is very complicated, and that's a part of my research that I'm doing now. I'll try to boil it down because I know, like this show, we're not going deeply into things. We're just trying to give like some main analysis of the major trends. So what's important to know here is that International Atomic Energy Agency, which is headed by the Secretary General Grossi, who is an Argentinian citizen, is not as impartial as it might seem or as it should be. And that was one of my questions to the Minister of Energy of Ukraine right now at the briefing. There's been a research, and not just by me, but last April, I believe, or March, Greenpeace came up with a brilliant piece of research showing the number of the Russian atomic agency, Rosatom, which now is present at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, how many of the employees of the Russian atomic agencies are now currently working for the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency. And the numbers are astonishing. Somebody gave me 80%, but I'll have to check it out. But there are about 10 or 12 people who are very close to the management, to the administration of the agency. Besides, one of the deputies of Grossi, Secretary General, is Mikhail Chudakov, who is a veteran of Rosatom, of the Russian Atomic Energy Agency. And it goes much deeper. Like when you look at the infiltration, let's call things what they are, of the agency by the Russians, which shouldn't be a surprise to us, Adrian, and the Byline Times and our audience, because we've been covering the infiltration by the Russian oligarchs and by the Kremlin of the international community and, say, a London scene, right, and the European political landscape. It doesn't surprise people who know what's going on. But there's also a financial part to it on which I'm working now, where Russia, Putin's Russia, has been traditionally donating a lot of money, making a lot of contributions for the International Atomic Energy Agency, which exists from the country's contributions. And that is a factor that also puts the impartiality of this agency under at least more scrutiny that it deserves. And when you listen closely for what the United Nations are saying, what the IAEA are saying, they never really name names. They try to play, this both sides have something to say. What is it Trump said? Both sides, like, there's this infamous saying, basically let's put it this way, not saying that the Russia in this particular case is the aggressor country that broke the border of the sovereign country and captured the property that belongs to this other sovereign country. And they're not naming names. They're all sort of language which is very elusive. And sometimes, they would occasionally blame Ukrainians for breaching the 7 pillars of safety. And basically what the ministers were saying at the briefing is, how can the Ukrainian side ensure the safety of the object that they don't manage? They can't. They don't have access to it. So I hope I answered your question.
No, it's good. And I just want to go back as well to this thread. I recommend people follow it out down on Twitter by Tom Zimbardo, who is at Tom Mostly Zen. And he and the experts who were on, as I say, make quite a good case for us not becoming unduly frightened or unduly worried about the risk of some catastrophe relating to this nuclear plant. And I would encourage people to read that just to kind of get a bit of perspective and a little bit of balance. But had an interesting comment by Saltley Gates on Twitter saying there are always idiots, accidents, malfunctions and mendacity. Then think about whether Russian or their ruling caste give a toss about radiation or the people of Ukraine. And this, I suppose, is the fear, isn't it, Zarina, is that it doesn't necessarily take a deliberate attempt by Russia to somehow cause damage here, or indeed by Ukraine. The very fact that we have missiles and guns firing close to this nuclear plant means that the risk of some kind of catastrophic incident is obviously far greater than if there were no weapons in that area at all.
Well, obviously, anybody with any sort of logic can see that. And not to go into that, I can just bring back the example of the Russian soldiers in Chernobyl digging trenches. By now, there's evidence, there are satellite photos, and there are people who eyewitnessed them locating their camps in the most contaminated areas in the so-called Rudy Forest, the red forest of the Chernobyl alienation zone. They're just that uneducated, and they had the maps from 1980s, and they had no idea where they were. So, yes, with this type of personnel, anything is possible. Of course, plus, I want to bring back what is known from March events, the parts that were present at the area in the station when they first entered were Chechens, who again are known, these particular detachments of Chechen troops are known for the very low level of education, and some of them I believe, might not be reading Ukrainian. I don't know if they read Russian, they have their own language, Chechen. They might not understand what the signs on the walls are saying. So anything is possible. And nuclear power plant is not the place where you want to have people who are not trained to be there, period.
I want to ask you another question. This has come in from a listener. This is from Graham. He says, is it true that there is a build-up of Russian forces in Belarus? And how will that play out for Ukraine as a whole?
Yes, a good question. Thank you. And I didn't go to Belarus personally, but as a person who writes reports on a daily basis and goes through a lot of material, according to the independent journalistic group called Belarusian Gayun, there is a build-up close to the Ukrainian-Belarusian border. And during the last week, it actually intensified. And there have been reports of the Russian planes delivering more military equipment, and there's seen movement there. So, yes, it's a concern, and I actually want to look more into it. I didn't have time because I'm working on this nuclear power plant project, but it's certainly concerning, and there could be multiple threats coming from that area.
Serena, it's been great to speak to you as always, and you know that we'll keep updating our listeners from the Russian invasion of Ukraine and making sure that they are kept in the loop with your brilliant reporting. I do recommend that people check out your Twitter account at Zarina Zabriskie, and there they'll find
Adrian?
links to Go on, Zarina.
Yeah, especially today, because I'll be sharing a lot of material from this briefing and from this brilliant training. And I basically, pun not intended, had a blast in Zaporizhia. I interviewed the head of the region whose 16-year-old son was kidnapped by the Russians and held in captivity and observed tortures and like a horrible story for 90 days. And this is the head of the Zaporizhia region. And he's a remarkable man, and he gave me a long interview, so I will be sharing that soon, along with interesting clips from the rescue station, where a lot of interesting things happening, including a little tour and a little excursions into the barn where the Russian rockets are being kept, to see what grads are like, what smerts are like, and an interview with a sapper of the person who's in charge of demining those rockets. That's like such brave people. I have no words for that. So, and from here I'll be moving most likely through Kiev to Chernobyl. So if anybody's interested in that, follow me. We'll be doing more shows from there, and I'll be sharing the information.
Brilliant. So she's at Zarina Zabriskie on Twitter. Very easy to find, and you'll find links there to all of her work, including some of the work she does for Byline Times as well. Thank you, Zarina. And as I always say to you, please stay safe. We'll catch up with you very shortly. Thank you. Zarina Zabriskie. And before we go, just a reminder that Byline Radio and the Byline Times podcast are funded by subscriptions to the Byline Times, our powerful monthly newspaper. We can report without fear or favour and hold the rich and powerful to account, because we are not funded by the rich and powerful. We are funded by ordinary subscribers, people like you. So do please subscribe if you can. Get details of how to subscribe at bylinetimes.com. That's at bylinetimes.com. Thanks very much indeed for listening. See you next time. Bye-bye now.
Bye.